In April 1986, the Soviet Union told the world everything was completely safe. The reactor was stable, the fire was out, and under control. While officials maintained this stance, a radioactive plume was already drifting toward the borders of Europe. At the time, the Soviet Union was the most heavily armed empire on Earth. It projected an image of absolute stability and impenetrable military might. But at 1:23 a.m. on April 26th, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Pripyat, Ukraine, that image was challenged by a physical reality the state could not ignore. The event forced a government built on secrecy to confront a disaster that was rapidly spreading beyond its borders and its control. A building the size of a stadium was engulfed in fire. Inside the facility's control room, operators watched as needle gauges spun rapidly into the red zone, indicating a power surge that had exceeded all safety limits. A second massive explosion launched the 1,000-ton steel and concrete reactor lid into the atmosphere, leaving the core open to the sky. This structural failure meant the graphite core was now burning openly, exposed to the environment. This exposed core released radioactive fallout at a rate 400 times higher than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. 500 miles away in Moscow, state officials met to draft a response that minimized the crisis. They issued reports stating that a minor accident had occurred, that there was no cause for alarm, and that the Soviet nuclear program remained the safest in the world. The government's priority was silence. The event was initially reported as a single, tiny line of text buried at the bottom of page 3 in the state newspaper. That brief admission did not appear until 2 full days after the reactor had exploded. As the radiation spread, the gap between the state's propaganda and the physical reality on the ground began to widen. To contain the site, 600,000 soldiers and civilians were ordered into the exclusion zone. These liquidators were tasked with manual labor in highly radioactive areas. Many of these workers were sent into the plant with defective equipment and little information about the actual radiation levels they were facing. Among them were 3 engineers who volunteered to dive into a flooded, radioactive basement to manually open drainage valves and prevent a further steam explosion. Despite the massive scale of the mobilization and the exposure of hundreds of thousands of people, the official Soviet death toll was recorded as 31. This chart shows the disparity between the record and the reality. While the state maintained its figure of 31, independent researchers later estimated that radiation-related illnesses would eventually claim 60,000 lives. For the Soviet leadership, maintaining the appearance of control was prioritized over the safety of the 600,000 citizens sent to the plant. Radioactive particles silently drifted out of Ukraine, carried on the wind, and were eventually detected by environmental sensors across northern Europe. The Soviet state could control the media, but it could not stop international radiation monitors from recording the fallout. When the international community detected the spike in Sweden, the Soviet Union was forced to admit the scale of the disaster to the world. Within the Soviet Union, the news triggered widespread anger, as citizens realized their government had withheld life-saving information. The realization that the state misled its people regarding their survival severely damaged the government's authority. Mikhail Gorbachev, the final leader of the Soviet Union, would later reflect on what led to the empire's final days. Gorbachev identified the secrecy and systemic failure revealed by Chernobyl as a primary factor in the Soviet collapse. 5 years after the reactor exploded, on December 25, 1991, the Soviet Union officially dissolved. Reactor number 4 is now encased in a massive steel arch designed to contain the radiation that remains at the site today. The Soviet Union no longer exists, but the physical site of its most significant failure remains under this shroud, entombed indefinitely.